Hi, everybody. It is March 1st. A lot of people in my professional network have kind of been asking me about how do I enable my folks or myself to kind of become AI native. I think that's a very hot term that has emerged. And I think especially with the emergence of like Claude Code, Codex, all these MCP connectors, there's a lot of verbiage that kind of flies around that can be really, really confusing and hard to keep up with. So I wanted to take kind of the stuff I'm exposed to, my experience with it, and kind of help isolate, like, depending on who you are, what I think the tool set you should be interacting with is, and how you can kind of graduate through them to kind of be like as AI native as possible. For the sake of just being like super, super AI predisposed. Basically, all I started with is I have my speaking notes that I wrote like in one draft, upload them to all the tooling that I need to kind of support creating this PowerPoint. So kind of go through it. Let's back up a little bit. So my target audience here is folks who are technical. So that's obviously very, very encapsulating, but kind of all levels, like whether you're a solo dev or someone who's like in a gigantic engineering org. And second are entrepreneurs of any type, like solo, non-technical, technical, whatever it may be. I think trying to frame everything in that category is the most productive, because the way I look at things is it kind of comes down to how codable is most of your work generally. I look at there being kind of three levels as it kind of stands to what being productive with AI means. I think there's a lot of like doomer cycles and like a lot of conversation that's like, oh my God, AI is going to replace my job. What am I going to do? But I think the matter of fact is the vast majority of people, like 90% of the people, are just consumers of AI, right? Like we use tools that we can ask questions to it. Maybe we do some basic level research. It's a thought partner to help us kind of like deliberate our thinking. Very few people actually get out of the level of like my LLM interaction produces an artifact. Most people in the world don't do that. And the thing I'd say is like, for anyone worried about like the doomer conversation or whatever, if you're like listening to this and like you're conscious that you want to be more ahead than you are, odds are you're pretty okay. I think the what is the frontier changes all the time. Thus the reason for dating this, that what happens next week might change some stuff in here. So zero, consumer. It's not really artifact production oriented. Level one, I'll kind of call the tinkerer, meaning that your interaction with LMs is I prompt a thing, an artifact that is useful comes out. That might be multiple turns inside of a conversation. But ultimately it's around like one input produces one output, and I'm at the keyboard to make that input output happen. Level two is what I'd kind of consider like AI native. I think the vast majority of people should kind of aim to be here in the modern day, where you have agentic tools that are able to work over like a longer horizon of time, but you're still generally prompting them, and kind of commandeering them in real time. Last is what I'm just calling like the AI wizard. This is productive stuff happens without you spending cognition on it, right? It means that your agents, your systems are able to work over longer periods of time. Maybe they're invoked on a schedule or by some like alternative trigger that you haven't created, or rather you have created, but you're not actively managing too intensely. For every one of these categories, we'll kind of break it into like both a non-technical and a technical track. So I'll speak to, depending on if you're a non-technical person or if you're an engineer or whatever it may be, like how you should kind of be posturing. So level one, these are the tinkerers as we kind of talked about. I think the way I look at this is that you are using tools and you're focused on input output, right? So you're at a keyboard, you want an artifact produced that is faster than what you were to do if you're to use a traditional tool. So for technical folks, this to me is about the product managers, people who like have done like high school level coding, college level coding, and maybe touch a class, and like you can understand what code is doing, like the high level of it. AI should be able to make you a lot faster. I think the thing that is most useful and productive here is getting your hands really wet with like quick app prototyping tools. So the ones that I kind of point at generally, Base 44, Replit, V0. It's a really crowded market. There's a lot of tools in this category, but the production of websites is fine. I think if you're like trying to make a business, that sort of thing, like it's a lot easier to make a really simple prototype, shoot that over to a potential customer, and get really quick validation on whether that prototype is direction correct or not, or doing a job that you want to. And these tools are getting really good that they'll come up with authorization, sign in, sign up, easy integration, like some product analytics tooling, that sort of thing. Really, really great entry point. I honestly think for the vast majority of people who are engineers, starting here is really great. And you'll produce a tool that hopefully, if you really like where it's going, you can drag it into more formalized agentic coding systems as you want to. One I'll also call out is Rourke. This is really new. I have not played with this myself. Web dev is where you'll see the vast majority of these tools generally sit. Rourke does mobile dev and will get you to the app store really quickly. I think that's a fairly unique pitch compared to the rest of the industry, where I think mobile app dev obviously has a lot of interest for connections to what's the word? The AR tooling inside of iOS, or native integrations with the ecosystem, like app views and that sort of thing. And Rourke is able to interact with those. I think that's especially useful and like worth considering, even for building an app at any level, starting with this sort of thing and then dragging it over to your coding agents. For Perplexity, I call this out as like an exhalation from ChatGPT. This applies to anyone. Perplexity is like native web browser. I mean, a lot of these tools have some native web browser, but I think depending on what you're building, it's really useful for getting real-time information relative to what a vanilla search would do in ChatGPT, where it's not super like modern, right? I can't know that the information I'm getting is like second to second, minute to minute, or hour to hour correct. Whereas, especially in finance or whatever it may be, Perplexity is really useful in that regard, where their scrapers, their UI is a little bit more native to being fast and being really, really current. The last one I'll call out is Claude tools for the technical folks. I think especially when you're interacting with interesting websites, whether it's like, oh, I love this app's design. So let's say we go to like DoorDash, right? For example, having Claude tooling in the browser, I think is really useful insofar as trying to interact with browser divs or understanding how components build. With all of that, I think there is utility in having Claude browser to a lot of your development experience, especially if you're working inside an organization or something where your application dev state might want some native automation, and having that tool in the browser is really helpful. Non-technical folks, solopreneurs, small teams that do content or marketing, agencies, whatever it may be, communication, heavy roles. The things I'll point out, my orientation here is like focus on the production of content. Perplexity is still relevant in this case, but I'll specifically call out Google. Their Gemini models are really, really good for image editing. As someone who grew up doing like Photoshop as kind of my like main like arty skill, it's kind of replaced a lot of the stuff that I would download Creative Cloud for. Where, for example, like this is a frame of me being so jubilantly stunned about something or another. There's a microphone in front of me, like there's overlap in colors. That would be pretty like gnarly to kind of like rotoscope me out of here. But it's pretty easy, I think, compared to some of the other LLM models. The Gemini models are really, really good at like preserving features of people. So I would then say, hey, get me like a flat background that I can then do further editing on, while knowing that my face is preserved. Gemini is really great in that way. One that's new that I'll call out, Kriya. They have these really cool set of features where if you're looking at where my mouse is, you can kind of do real-time editing, where you can like put objects, even 3D objects, mutate them in real time and prompt, and in real time watch the LLM kind of change your object. I just think that one's really cool. There are some tools for SVGs and stuff that's also really useful for kind of replacing your kind of cloud workflow. Those are very, very novel. I can't recommend them yet. But depending on how things go and if I film another, I'll include them. One thing I almost forgot to mention, this PowerPoint was generated using Gamma. Gamma's raised a number of gigantic rounds recently. Really, really great tool for making like really quality presentations. If you want context, like this whole PowerPoint, as I said, I grabbed my speaking notes, like my literal just like thinking draft of what I want to talk about, dropped it in a prompt in here, and this all popped out. So I barely did any work. Super, super easy. I can imagine it'll save a lot of people time, especially when you can just be conversational with the tool. Level two, so this is like kind of getting native. Idea here being you are already used to kind of like prompting tools, input, output. This is kind of the question about like how do you make these systems work for you and kind of like almost kind of have like that training pattern of I can be a developer for my own processes. And when I say that, I'm not talking just about the non-technical or the technical folks. I mean that for everyone, and that it should be easier, I think, in the AI age for everyone to generally code solutions to their problems. The way that that happens is that you have workspaces that have integrations with the services that you have to work with all the time. So for the engineers, I would shoot you guys straight to Claude Code and Codex. If you haven't heard what these are, like start doing some reading. I think they are very significant for how development happens in the modern day, and especially for software engineering. The way things are progressing, every single like 2 days, there is something gnarly that comes out with one of these two tools, and it's worth staying very plugged into both of these. A lot of industry has adopted Cursor, and today, as of like kind of March 1st, I think a lot of the conversations moving away from Cursor. I think they're losing a little bit of what that kind of leading edge is on product, because it just kind of seems the question of like what your IDE is just not that important anymore when you can have coding agents where the skill seems to be more about how can I manage parallelization of a lot of work rather than one IDE working on one feature at a time. And a lot of these tools are kind of all interacting with the same ideas. So whether that is like in reference to some of the stuff that Claude Code and Codex can do, MCP integrations, browser use, stronger guardrails, Codex. I'll share kind of like a live example briefly, like I'll spend 2 minutes. But before I get into that, in choosing Claude or Codex, I think some of this is personal preference. The biggest differentiator I'll say for both, Claude has pretty harsh usage limits. Codex does not. Codex can run for longer, but I have found that for the general stuff I'm developing with and the sort of code bases I'm interacting with, Claude Code is easier to do clever stuff with. If you have one track of work on something that is very, very early, it is much easier for Codex, I feel, to work for a longer time on getting one feature done to a very meaningful capacity, right? But with Claude Code, I think when you start thinking about these like multi-agents, sub-agents, how do I work in the context of a team? How do I integrate it with my Jira or my PM's like production workflow, like wants to ship this way? I think it is easier to graduate from the Claude Code experience into that sort of thing that is for Codex. But if you're working on something from scratch and that thing from scratch might take hours of work, Codex will build in that way natively. So bookmarking that. Most of the conversation I've been having with folks are like CTOs, CIOs, or like people in the dev space who just have questions. So I'll just kind of hop over to like, let me make sure that this is reachable. Someone notified me that like my website was down. Sick, by the way. That just happened. So I have like a domain, site's not reachable. What Claude Code is really, really good for, or coding agents in general, is when I'm working on code, as you can kind of see, I have multiple tabs open at any given time. Every one of these tabs is split across projects. Best case scenario, when I prompt an agent, I want something done, it works on that something for 20 minutes, an hour 30, that sort of thing. And there are ways to kind of hack to make sure that like when I'm talking to Claude, it works for that long. But let's just start with like something really simple. So when I'm talking to Claude, I personally will always enable dangerously skip permissions. Depending on your context, you probably don't want to do that. But the reason I start with that is that it's easy to turn that off if I start doing something that I get scared about or whatever. Two, work trees are really, really great. If you're not familiar, a work tree is a Git primitive where it'll clone the stuff you're working on into its own folder structure. So if I'm working on one website, right, and I need to worry about having multiple features working at the same time, I can have an agent kind of working on that section of my literal like file structure without having to collide with other things and worrying about the git commit state that happens in that case. So what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and start by saying, let's open up a work tree, dangerously skip permissions. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the dangerously skip permissions, and I'll say, turn on plan mode. My website at lucky9labs.com is having an address failure. You have write/read permissions to Vercel, which is where it's hosted, and browser tools to work on to interact with the site. Can you please investigate what's going on in a read-only fashion and then create a spec for the fix? So the reason for writing this way, I generally, when I'm doing this agentic stuff, I want the spec first. That is the purpose of switching into plan mode, to make sure that when I'm working on something, in the pattern of using these tools, generally know which way they'll start to stray wrong and right. And plan mode, as it currently stands, is a very useful kind of primitive in agentic coding that, as a developer, it kind of becomes my main handoff spot to say, like, I understand what the model wants to do. I can interrogate it. I can have it ask questions to me that are critical, and kind of go from there to explore, hey, like, the thing you're doing might be prone to like writing the wrong thing or duplicating code that I already know exists, that sort of idea. While that's ongoing, so for example, we can also go ahead and say, let's do external site. Let's say dangerously skip permissions again. And we'll do another work tree, and we'll call this one posthog. So my website stopped working. I had no idea. I spun it up a couple of days ago. Posthog is a thing I know that might be helpful for alerting how my quote unquote product analytics are doing. So we'll again switch to plan mode, say, create a plan for integrating posthog into my website so I can understand product engagement and how different pages are doing. Then I want you to make sure that the posthog integration is using the latest libraries. Okay, so I'll explain what just happened. Latest libraries and is verifiably deployed. Verifiably deployed. Jesus Christ. Okay, again, I'll explain what's going on here, so we'll revisit this in a sec. Jesus Christ. Verifiably deployed. So while my screen was freaking out, that was the kind of the beginning of Claude Code taking over the browser. Had issues, of course, but I think one of the benefits of kind of Claude Code over Codex is this specific thing, where allowing Claude Code to interact and click on browser elements by having an extension that's available inside of Chrome. It's able to kind of like more natively be a developer if you're doing front-end related work, right? If I'm saying I need this button or this div change, right, in a more particularly clever scenario, if I want to write end-to-end testing, a clever way that people have come up to do end-to-end testing is they will create a markdown file for their repo, describe the behavior of click-through that they would expect in their code base, saying, oh, if I land on the homepage and someone clicks the map button, I would expect a map to open that is centered on the location of San Francisco. And I then want to make sure that all of the Pete's Coffees in San Francisco have pings on the map, right? That is something that you can verbally describe to an agent. And with something like Claude in browser, it can do, and you can kind of have like a local test almost run that is an end-to-end test across many agents that verifies that when an agent does something, you now have like an agentic native way to interact with your site, right? It's still freaking out, but it has somehow gone ahead and landed on we need to fix something with the old domain and Vercel's IPs, right? At the same time, I have another like agent going on that's researching how PostHog works. We'll kind of wait for these plans to finish. Of course, I can keep jumping between different projects, verify what the issues are. And the idea being is that I think any AI native dev, when you kind of get comfortable in this sort of pattern, you should kind of expect that you can have 5 to 10 agents running at any given time. That should be pretty comfortable, I suppose. So one thing that's great, plan mode will ask you questions before it kind of proceeds. Client hold, not sure. Let's go, not sure. I switched my domain registration to AWS recently. We will have to query that. And so this will keep on going. We'll kind of focus on this PostHog one because it seemed I don't want to get into my account private networking for obvious reasons. But once this plan pops up, okay, more questions. We'll give it a sec. No, we need to set up a PostHog account. PostHog Cloud, we'll put it in the US. Sometimes, I mean, this is the one spot that I wish agents would cover, but they are tenuous in regards to how much they'll actually do it. With the browser tools, you can sometimes have the agents like set up the accounts for you and do the login and such, and that's really nice. Recently, again, as of March 1st, I've been finding that they will refuse to do that because then they'll see your private keys and such, which is less fun, but obviously more correct. So we'll go through here. Plan has popped out of Claude. We'll go look at what they want to do, install PostHog. They've researched the most recent version. That's great. Update our end example and end local. Perfect. US Cloud, knowing how PostHog works, I'm aware that this is how PostHog routing generally functions. So that should be fine. Use client is good. And then, yes, we need the page tracker inserted and a toast inside the PostHog. Yeah, PostHog provider. Perfect. This all looks fine to me. If we end up on the wrong trail, I will just say, again, go ahead, shoot. Generally, the way I think about stuff actively, like I think people get paranoid about like, oh, what if my agent does the wrong thing or goes down the wrong path? The thing I'd say is in the modern day, tokens are subsidized. They are very cheap, I think, for the average developer. Between using both Codex and Claude, I am generally paying for like the $100 a month Claude plan and the $20 a month Codex plan. So Codex will do simple things for me. Claude will do complex things for me. I've had periods where I'll completely blast through Claude usage, c'est la vie. But the thing I'd say is like, in looking at how you develop, I think it is attitude-wise correct to trust the agent to implement your plan correctly, let it run off for hours, create a PR off your work tree, and then as the developer, again, dancing between 5 or 10 different agents at a given time, go look at the PR, review it, have the agentic default implementation of whatever it may be, review it. And if you don't like what it did, just don't accept the PR. Try again, right? You can like, if it's close, get conversational with it, right? This took all of like 1 minute to build. It's not a complicated thing, right? But in the case that you're doing something longer form, like a really complex debugging process, or something like let's come up with a good example, like a really gnarly like CI/CD case, right, where like you have to interact with the cloud and go back and forth and query what might be going on. I think it is nicer as a developer to just be really thoughtful about the plan, like break it down like pretty atomically and trust the coding agent to try to one or two shot it and interrupt if you happen to catch it going wrong. But don't be so, I think, anxious about what the code is doing, because ultimately between most of the tokens spent, if you are on like these individual plans, your token spend is highly subsidized. If it messes up and it took a short time to mess up, 15 minutes or something, it's easy to back it up, try again. One thing I'll also call out that's really like fun and new, this is a direct reaction to OpenClaw. Remote control is sick. I love it. If I had a more stable computer that was on all the time, I would be doing this constantly. What this is that remote control allows you to kind of like continue where you picked off from like the Claude app, including from mobile. They used to have teleport is what they called it, but the problem is that teleport would put you in the Claude sandboxes, which they have access to your file system and all this other kind of stuff. So like if I'm connected to my Vercel project or my Supabase instance or ClickHouse or I have my AWS creds or something, when I'm remotely controlling my computer, I'm able to run that via phone. So I can go on a walk and continue, right? And so that's super new. Part of kind of what the modern thing is. I would get in pattern, I think, of like, it's nice to not be sitting all the time. So remote controlling, like work as it's ongoing, I think will become more pattern for more people. Going back, so that was a much longer detour than I wanted it to be, but that's okay. Moving on to the non-technical person, I'd say like Claude Cowork is kind of the default thing I'd recommend. I think I'm kind of glazing Claude a little bit more than I was expecting to. Codex, or rather, OpenAI has a similar product called Frontier, I believe it's called. What's it called? Let me make sure before I spout that. So both, let's actually go here. Claude Cowork. Both Claude and OpenAI have a product that is sort of like, let's take the experience of like coding agents and just like agentic integration tools and bring them to something that's a little bit more non-technical, user friendly. I think this is directionally correct. I think for a lot of people in large orgs, like these are the general sets of tools to be adopting. Your Zapier, your HubSpot, like a lot of these like CRM tools will kind of like brew up their own agentic systems, but they're obviously kind of limited. The difference is, so the reason I'm showing the OpenAI box, it applies to Cowork too, is mostly about like you kind of get a very friendly surface on top of what you're already working on. Or rather, like it's very easy to auth into your surfaces and then connect to broader context and have agents, I don't know why I said it like that, agents work on your systems in a way that like kind of default can come with scheduling or tasks or like reminders or notifications, right? If I go back to the deck, so the thing I would say is like most of these tools are able to connect to your like HubSpot, your Slack, your Google Workspace, whatever it may be. If you're someone who already has processes, like you're a solopreneur that has a small team, you're a PM, you're a marketing person, you are business development, where you already have your HubSpot that's like hyperactive. Claude Cowork is the one I'll kind of walk through. The difference with this tool is it can connect to your local files, like in the same way that like the coding agents can. The most important thing are these connectors. OpenAI's equivalent will have the same stuff for the record. So again, like choose your kind of flavor of choice. But if I want to like cross my tool set and have agentic systems working for me in the background to do something repeatedly, across these systems. Cowork can do that. Frontier can do that. So for example, like I made this deck by having those speaker notes read by Gamma, right? But if I want to, for say, like, let's say I had a regular set of speaker notes, right? Like I have speaker notes that I will update every 2 weeks inside of my Notion at this link. I want you to create a Gamma deck that reflects those updates so I can show them to my clients. Whatever. It will manage the task creation. It will manage like the interaction between systems. I think generally the reason I think about like level 2 is where AI native is generally for folks is the way I think about it is like what you're doing is you are training yourself to develop your own patterns. And I think the nice thing about co-work specifically is it's not all the way there yet to fully govern, like fully meant for a team setting. But what it can do is when I come up with a workflow, it's pretty easy for me to then share it with someone else, right? When I come up with a pattern thing or I want to post to Slack or whatever, like I can have native integrations into my system that other people can copy and mimic and clone. So when I, as an operator inside of my context, non-technically, want to educate or onboard people on my team to do the same, it is really trivially to. And I think it becomes like almost this viral expertise that can kind of spread. Let's go professional and clean. Let's do 8 to 10 slides because I'm not paying for Gamma and I do not want to burn through my credits. We'll kind of let that run, but we'll keep going with the presentation. We'll allow Gamma. This is also important. So if you work in like a professional setting where you have to be worried about downstream effects of what might happen in your system, when you're interacting with the like kind of like connectors and plugins, one thing that's nice is it is easy to like, for example, with Gamma, or rather, let's come with a better example. Let's look at Google Drive. Okay, maybe not. We'll look at my Notion. So let's say like my Notion hypothetically has like downstream consumers. Or I'm worried about people like and their privacy being read by Claude. I can disable and turn off specific things. So I can say like, hey, before you read who's in my team, that's private information. You can make it ask you before it does that. Or if I'm worried about it, like deleting a page, that's pretty consequential. I can have it like automatically say, you are not allowed to make that effort, right? And obviously that's really important. So play with the tool, kind of get comfortable with like where you want to go. We'll keep on doing always allow for this Gamma stuff because it's just making a harmless presentation for me. We'll kind of let that run. The other note I'll kind of add is, or I'll add 2 notes, same as for the coding agents in Claude. You can command the stuff from the app. So once you set the integration once from your desktop, you can kind of do it from your phone too. Obviously super convenient. The thing I'd say is if you are in a risk averse environment, if you have to be worried about the consequences of your even editing, what I'd say is like set up a sandbox. Generally those sandbox, sandbox in like HubSpot's context will be like, you can make like a clone safe environment where what you do is just like kind of like a containerized safe thing that you can play with. And that won't hurt your production, like real data. If I'm in a CRM and I want to set up an automation, I have to be worried about like what comments my agent writes or something. A sandbox will let you test and play with things and iterate before you kind of like go live, right? And so if you don't know what that means, ask a technical person. Most people will be able to do that. If you're really, really whimsical, you can obviously ask an LM to teach you how to do that. Odds are you'll get pretty far. If the slides would like to proceed. There we go, level 3. So these are like what I call kind of like AI wizards. So this would be like, you're all about like getting your systems working while you're sleeping, right? It's not just about like it's not just about input, output, or getting stuff done more effectively. It's about moving faster. Um, I'll be pretty brief here just for the purposes of like exercise left for the viewer. um, for engineers, I think if you're someone who lives in DevOps land, like you understand infrastructure, Terraform, sandboxes, I think the natural lane of thinking you'll go down after seeing like a Claude Code or and all this sort of stuff is like, oh my God, how do I get this running in the cloud? Can I get like my product feedback provoking my Claude Code and automatically building stuff for me? Or can I have the creation of like a linear ticket or a Jira ticket start kickoff work? That is the correct lane of thinking. The thing I'll also note before I talk about that though, I think a lot of technical people end up getting kind of caught in this trap of, oh my God, the thing to do, because it's so exciting right now, is build scaffolding. I want to build agentic tools that make my agentic tools better. A lot of people do that. I did that. I ended up archiving my whole repo that did that like Tuesday. I think it is worth doing for the sake of self-education. But the thing you have to realize is that coding agents are where most of the revenue and mass of this industry is currently going. So when you build scaffolding, like be comfortable that the time you're spending on it will likely get continually eaten by what the big labs are doing. The place I'd say this is really worth doing is if you have a really established product, like you already kind of know, like, here's my modus operandi, like, here's my, I already have like a known revenue chart, or I exist in like a big tech org where we have like all these other like political people problems, like large org issues that need to be worked on. I think it's very worth figuring out how do I get my DevOps to work with coding agents. Stripe famously is a good example. They have a couple of blogs that they've written that I will reference for Stripe. Let's do Stripe minions. They put some articles in the beginning of February kind of talking about like how they have services where in Slack, Jira, whatever it may be, they have sandboxes like dev boxes, I think is what they call them, that run the whole Stripe app natively. An agent can come in, claim a dev box, interact in that play space, containerized, safely work on a product, like or rather feature request or a bug, whatever it may be, and try to one or two shot the solution to that problem, run end-to-end testing, create pull requests, all that sort of stuff, so that the dev ideally is not even conscious that a request came in, but can then go ahead and be like, oh, something new to check out. Oh, look, this is like a bug fix for like this one button that would have usually meant like me reviewing a ticket, taking that ticket, dumping into whatever, and spinning up something new. This is a privilege of having an established product and a DevOps team. So if you're not in that category, I would not be thinking about this stuff. This is obviously aspirational, and I think there are ways, like it's worth toying with in any case. I would just, again, kind of recognize that like, if you spend too much time in this land, it can be really easy to convince yourself that you're being productive with something that's like very likely to be antiquated when you're up against like these like companies raising $110 billion like on a random Wednesday. But get comfortable with MCPs, playwrights, like try to put Docker containers up in the cloud. Worthwhile exercise to do at a light level. Just I would premise it on like you have a product that kind of has earned this level of automation. This is where things are going. It's obviously exciting. And like I think if you want to become really, really talented in AI dev, like this is the stuff to learn to do because this skill will be useful for a lot of folks, is what I'd say. For non-technical folks, so I think this is the more interesting one. The problem with, I think, the LLM industry in general is the reason we're seeing so much adoption of coding agents. I'm also watching my battery because for that reason I chose to sit outside. The reason we're seeing so much adoption of code and the vast majority of revenue in like the LLM space is going towards code is coding has this benefit, or rather, I guess, this privilege compared to a lot of other domains, that the way that you write the main artifact is very similar to the way that you write the validation of said artifact, right? So a system that gets really good at producing code can generally get really good at validating that same code. If I say I want a website that is doing XYZ features, it's easy to then go to that same agent and say, like, can you verify that we're doing these XYZ features? The people who I think who are non-technical and can become AI wizards, what you are is you have domain expertise in whatever it is you do, right? When we've seen people go to these like hackathons from Claude or Anthropic, some of the most interesting stuff that's produced are from people who like maybe coded like once in their life before, maybe even never. They're farmers, they're doctors, they're people who like they understand the kind of like domain and the value, like the core nugget of what's really important in their process or workflow. And what that allows them to do is they can go to a coding agent, right? If I dump this, like, whoops, wrong terminal. If I dump this sort of UI on someone non-technical, like, this is mostly arcane. Like, it's not like super useful or interactive. But what you can kind of get in the pattern of with this sort of framing is you should be able to, if you have domain expertise, is kind of like have this like basic loop, right? I ask an agent to do XYZ things. So let's make this tangible. I'm a doctor who has a like set of patients in, let's say, orthodontistry, right? And I care about my patients' compliance to their like specific Invisalign plan. Again, topical because I'm on Invisalign, whatever it may be. Right? What I will say is, hey, I want to set up an automation or kind of like almost like a CRM for my orthodontics clinic that will follow up with my patients over email, telling them like, hey, you should be switching trays today based on what appliances we've given you, all this sort of stuff. You probably won't ship that version 1 to anyone, but that UI might be useful for you, right? It might be like something that's like, hey, all of a sudden I can look at all my patient data. It's secure. I built it. It runs only inside my orthodontist clinic. So all of a sudden, I don't need to worry about like some random Y Combinator kid pitching me like a $5,000 tool. Great. So version 1, I have a cool UI. It does a thing. Next step is you have domain expertise, right? What this allows you to do that like some random engineer like moi sitting in Fillmore Street is you can understand the quirks and nuances of value like derivation from where you've begun, right? If I am worried about my patients and their Invisalign compliance, what I might do next is I might ask my agent to read the emails that come back. And all of a sudden it might be like, oh my God, all of a sudden people are saying like, hey, I needed like a tray replacement that I never got. That might then want to book appointments. We're riffing here. So this might be a terrible example. We're just trusting a process. I might want to be able to book appointments for them, right? And in those appointments, I need to have the right materials prepped, or might need to make sure that the Invisalign provider has shipped the trays that they need when they come into the office next. As the domain expert, what I can do is I can look at the kind of like meta prompts that the agent has created for my automations and my systems. And I can kind of begin the organic loop of agent produces something, I verify. If it is good, I reinforce the agent that this is on the right track. I want you to preserve these rules. Share with the team. Now it's a tool that's useful for them. Great. If I am not happy with what's doing, all of a sudden I can interact with the LM, kind of begin to understand like why did it do the things that it did, and then say like, I want you to patch your inputs, your agentic flows so that you only do these things. And we all of a sudden are in this kind of like recursive loop of, I have a tool that's custom. I fully own the cost. I don't need to worry about the regulation because it runs fully on our servers. And all of a sudden it's safe. I guess the thesis statement of that being is if you have domain expertise, the way that you become an AI wizard without being technical is you should start using the coding agent, is what I'd say. Look at what I said for everything about the technical people, like kind of start at level 1, like build yourself a cute prototype of whatever it may be, like using like a like a Rourke or a Replit, whatever it may be. Get yourself off the ground using one of these tools. But then kind of get to the level that like the way OpenAI talks about like agent execution, or like having these task domains automatically run, what you can get to is you understand the evaluation and optimization for your domain, whether it's orthodontics or farming or business development or content, right? Let it be like a fully kind of like proprietary thing that is like a reflection of what happens in your head, that allows you to, I want an agent that begins doing work for me. I don't necessarily need a UI for every single thing I'm creating. It might be fun for creating a product for other people to use. But if you want to get faster and you want systems that work while you're sleeping, take your domain expertise, communicate to agents what you want built, verify the outputs of those agents, refine and work with the agents inside of the coding agents to improve over time and iterate. And before you know it, if you're building on a skeleton that like a Rourke or a Vercel has provided to you, I think you will generally find this is probably the quickest way to become really, really dangerous with AI, I think. Because the coding agents hopefully can be a wrapper for most of your problems, and you have the expertise to know how validation should work at scale, right? And all of a sudden, you do this enough times, you'll begin kind of asking yourself in the same way an engineer would, like, hey, how can I get the validation stuff to like bubble up to me intelligently? How can I get my team to kind of like self-govern really nicely and all this other kind of stuff? I think like, again, emerging domains, we'll see where Cowork goes. We'll see where Frontier goes. But if you've started here and you're like, oh, look at this. I have my fun little presentation that I'm able to spin up and do regularly. I'm a business dev person. I want like slide decks created for every custom like client that comes to our website. That is something that a coding agent would do, and you would know your like company brand standards. You would know your company's like expectations on how presentations look. That all of a sudden, like the prompt that this agent uses to create these presentations every now and again, you would have the expertise to go ahead and say like, this AI generated image looks awful. Like, I have a very particular style. Let me upload like our brand guidelines. Can you use these instead? And before you know it, odds are you might be automating like 80 is a little aggressive. Optimistically, you're able to like automate like what is like 40, 50% of the stuff that is grunt work, right? I'll pause there. This is kind of like just a singular update for just like March 1st. Look at that. We'll even use the key takeaway slide from this new diagram. Recognize where you are. There are levels to all of this, whether you're technical or not. Start with the stuff you're comfortable with and recognize that like it's very easy to kind of go from one to the next. Pick tools that are context relevant to who you are. For the technical folks, it can be really easy to obsess over the kind of crazy, wild stuff that your imagination might compel you to do about like, oh my God, my agents can build the agents. But know that the labs are also thinking all the similar things. So focus on like, again, whether you're a domain expert or not, focus on the things that will progress you to solving real problems for real people. If you have domain expertise, you probably default think that way. If you're an engineer, recognize that everyone being able to code makes distribution matter more than ever. So think about whose headache you're actually solving. And whether you're building for someone else or for yourself, like recognize that like most of the strength in these systems comes from having a version 1, recognizing their weaknesses in a version 1 of anything that an LM produces. But hopefully your own experience, your own background will kind of teach you how to kind of get that flywheel going that compounds your advantage every single time. So that's just March 1st. Maybe I'll do this again in like 2 weeks or something when everything else like, it, goes completely in a different direction. But hopefully that was helpful. I did not expect to be talking for 50 minutes. Laptop's about to die and sunsetting. So hopefully this is helpful. I'll make sure everything's marked to chapters, and I'll talk to y'all again soon. Thank you. Peace.